That sounds great. Thank you, David.
Okay, so today we're going to be doing a lot of work, taking a deeper dive into our draft recommendations for the DTO. First, I'd like to take a few minutes. I wanted to thank everyone in Natural Systems for the countless hours that they put into research and discussions and developing our revisions. I'd also specifically like to thank Ash. Ash Miller was our scribe and wordsmith, and his input was invaluable. I asked him, although this is a work session for ourselves, I asked him to be available to answer any questions as we go through, specifically regarding some language and wording that you may have. So I want to run through the process today and highlight our a couple things, our working documents and how we will proceed. We have two documents that I'm going to be sharing with you shortly. One is an assessment tool that I developed to help navigate through the tree ordinance. Not many are as familiar with it as folks on Natural Systems, so it will be a high-level overview going section by section and showing the types of changes, whether they were additions, clarifications, other changes, or strike-throughs. At the end of the document, there are the assessment questions that you all received after our last meeting. These are the general questions just to help aid, guide, and focus your review. So you can read those if you find them helpful. In tandem, we will be looking at the revised draft recommendations that we prepared, and we will review these changes. Clarifying commentary, you'll see as we go through deeper is left. We left that there on the right-hand side. Some of that commentary will help you in the process. And you'll notice Ash's name is on all those comments, being that he was our scribe. Know that everything that was written there was developed by consensus of the whole committee. The process for today and going forward. So my recommendation for the process today is to first complete a thorough run-through, a high-level rather, run-through of the entire document and a viewing. This way we can see all the changes up close, and then we can, before we discuss the particular revisions piece by piece. Please make note of any questions or concerns that you have as we're going along in that process for when we delve deeper. Second, we'll go back to the beginning of the document and we'll discuss your questions, concerns, and proposed revisions. I believe this will help to facilitate your understanding of the document as a whole, and it'll also in the end probably be faster because some of your questions will be answered most likely in the document itself as we go through it. So what are the deliverables? End of day today, best case scenario, I'm hopeful that we can come up with an approval for the draft recommendation that we can send to Kay and Hugh. Keep in mind, this is still a working document. This is not our final version that we're approving for the City Commission, but rather it is giving Hugh and Kay and Public Works an idea of what we're thinking so that we can flesh this out further in the weeks to come. They'll be joining us next Friday for a thorough work through of the recommendations. Hopefully we can get some feedback there and see what their positions are on our intended changes. Based on the progress at that point, we should be nearing a final draft, hopefully, for us to approve or not. After that work session next week, we repeat this entire process all over again with the administrative standards, which is another standalone document that is made part of the TO by reference. It codifies and quantifies the details in the tree ordinance is extremely important. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. We will begin this work immediately after the meeting with the city next week, and most likely this will, in Natural Systems, and most likely this will run in tandem with our tweaking and approval of the final draft ordinance. On a final note about what we've come up with today, there remain several questions and concerns, namely around the measurement of canopy and DBH, which is diameter at breast height, another measurement of trees, and in certain parts of the draft ordinance, it may be deemed a best practice to insert that instead. Natural Systems is looking into this and the best path forward regarding the language, and we hope to share that with you guys at the meeting next Friday. If we are able to submit the draft to Hugh and Kay today, we would make a note that we're working on several other things that we'd like to discuss with them at that time. So I just wanted to make that clear. So before we begin, are there any questions about the process or anything before we delve in? Okay.
Yeah, Rich, I'm a little confused on how you're planning to approach this. Are you going to use the summary document, or are you going to go right into
Both in tandem. I'm going to share my screen shortly, David, and I'm going to have, I want to do it in 2 steps. I think it would be best, it may be repetitive, but I actually think it'd be faster. I'm going to have both documents open, and the first step is, actually, why don't we just do that right now? Make sure I can share
And
my screen.
I'd encourage folks, I know it's a lot on the screen, to open those documents that I sent through the ESB email, because that way, if it's not big enough for you to see them as he's going in tandem, you can follow on a bigger screen in yours.
Yeah, the reason I asked is I think the red line document is the more useful of the 2 documents,
Of course.
obviously, and I think we should probably assume that everyone on ESB has already read through the document that was sent out by David a couple of weeks back. So it feels like we can jump right into the details, just in the interest of time.
I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure everybody on the committee understands that, but I'm willing
Understands what?
understands the scope of what we've done to the ordinance. I thought it would be helpful to quickly go over the 21 sections that are in the ordinance to help see it as an entire document before going back in and actually making comment and having discussion on each one. I think it could speed the process along. The assessment questions, can you guys see my screen? Is everyone seeing
Yes,
this?
it's visible. You're good.
Okay. So, and is it readable by everyone? Is the size of the fonts okay? Hello? Okay. So basically, so on the right-hand side, what I was intending on doing is just kind of quickly going over some of these things and looking at the document, scrolling it through, spending 30 seconds a page just to familiarize everyone. But if everyone feels they're familiar enough with the tree ordinance, I'm happy to delve right in.
Well, the other question, Rich, is how you want feedback. I mean, can we discuss as we're going along?
I would like to, but as I
Okay.
said, I'd like to take 30 seconds per
Sure.
page with no discussion so that everyone can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about, the total scope of the project. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So section 911 is intent. We have here the major changes, and I won't cover everything in the sake of time, as Dave said. I won't cover every point that I have here on the right, but I'll hit the key points. Here we added numbers 13 and 14 to make it more comprehensive under intent. In section B, we changed the percentages, and you will see percentage changes throughout this document. These are not changes that address making the ordinance more stringent. These are the changes from the change in the metric. So now that we're using the interdev numbers, we needed to adjust these because these numbers were set on our old metric, which was not as inclusive. Moving on to C, we have a theme that is throughout. We are making our reports more accessible to the public, including tree survey maps. And then in D, this requires a yearly outreach to the public to help to the first year, and then yearly public outreach to keep citizens informed. 9.12 is the applicability and exemptions. We added language to codify protected trees. We cleaned up some of the things in there that did not need to be in there. Under section C1, we wanted to address things like MOUs, memoranda of understanding, making a backstop so that the ordinance wasn't unduly weakened. Section 2, we talking about the database again and public availability to that. In section 4, we wanted to require an expedited written authorization. This is in case of emergency tree removal. Moving down the line, we have, again, in emergency tree removal, we have a just expansion of the definition of the requirements of the 72-hour notification. And in D, we further define affordable housing to make sure that if we are granting exemptions for affordable housing, they truly are affordable. In 913, we codify the administrative standards, which will be added to this by reference, and we give a timetable for the city to do so, 90 days. Moving on to section B there, that's just a clarification of the tree species list, same thing, 90 days to clarify the species list. A tree canopy cover credit, we are looking at trees for, we discount distressed trees to be counted, trees that are covered with ivy or wisteria, things like that. Section B, we have to clean up. There's actually no change in that green section there. Going on to that, D, you'll see that in red. We just split this because these are two just different standards here. We defined understory trees and shrubs as well. And there in E, we'll come back to this. This 10% here is the credit given for newly planted trees, which we recommend that be increased, because as we'll dive into that, we see that that's not tenable or reasonable. In 915, we have the tree canopy cover requirements, and we just make some clarification there in point A. In B, we strike moderate. We felt only considering high-risk trees, trees that were at high risk to be critical. In C, we adjust the percentages here in commercial. This is the same exact rubric we used for, metric we used for adjusting for interdev in the other portions, same here. In number 4, we have alternates for alternative compliance, as well as defining tree removal permit and conservation plans. In 5, we are looking at the, the tree bank offset. We believe that that was too high to use the tree bank for a major portion of the offset would reduce canopy, so we adjusted that number. Single family, we changed those numbers again to come up to the proper metric. We defined replanting and some other verbiage. In E, we added City Schools of Decatur and City Schools of Decatur owned properties. And we gave them, we'll get into the details there, but we gave them a little bit more leeway with the canopy on some of their existing properties in that verbiage. 916, tree canopy replacement requirements. We basically have some trees that where it needs to be planted as a requirement would be considered protected trees under the ordinance. And that goes on in this section here too. We also require those to be put into the public tree survey map. In D, we have, this is changing the numbers again. We have alternative compliance. We also talk about the city arborist and codify her role there. And then in this section, we're talking about offsets. If you don't have the minimum, which would be 50%, if you don't have that, you can have offsets for green infrastructure. We did create a backstop with that would not allow someone to scrape an entire lot by having only half of that being allowed to be used. And that would be here, and we can get into the details of that shortly. Single family, this is the same as above, but for single family residences. The tree bank, not much change here. We just clarified the language to make sure it was robust. And we also recommend that the tree bank funds not be used for tree removal. That can come out of this. If the city has to remove trees, it can come out of the general fund. Standard canopy value, everything is good there except in C. We added public reporting. Easements, the only change there was also to include those trees that are in the easements under the definition of protected tree, which by the way is what they intended, but the verbiage wasn't there. So it's just basically clarifying and strengthening the verbiage. Tree maintenance requirements, we do the same thing here. We just kind of maintained wasn't a detailed enough word, so we added some defining language to that. The rest is unchanged there. 9111, no change. 12, we have a change in the percentage here. I think we were going 25% critical root zone encroachment was not congruent with the rest of the DTO as it was. It was 20 in all other cases, so we made that change. Tree protection requirements 1.3, we did some clarifying language of the critical root zone. B is an interesting change here. We move the land disturbance and grading limits from a project-based limit to an actual lot-based limit, which makes a lot more sense, and it ties into the lot-based limits that already exist in the UDO. No changes in C, some language changes, some simple language changes there to strengthen. And we are at boundary trees. There's no change here. Certified arborist, obviously, we just wanted that to be in there instead of just arborist. 9.15 was landmark trees. We expanded that section to be landmark and priority trees and included tree value rubric and census. And so we clarify the language a bit there and the terminologies, help to define it a little bit more. And then we go into the added portions, priority trees. We define priority trees here in F. The tree value rubric in G is not fully defined, but this is its placeholder, and we give the city 90 days to come up with after adoption, to come up with a method that they're going to use for valuation. In H, same type of thing. We're giving them 90 days for the task force. So the document calls for a city tree task force and a city board, which we can talk about in more depth, and we will. This just gives them 90 days to make sure that is set up as well. 9.16, here's the tables. We add some clarity to the header in A. The table has just been adjusted for everything that we've seen so far. This is a quick reference guide, and we adjusted these numbers and this verbiage to reflect what we've done so far in the document to this point. Permitting B here, we made some changes here in 2.2. And these are mostly to codify the tree removal application. You know, these were not defined enough in the tree ordinance. So we have the tree removal process here defined. We have in 3, this would be, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. This is diseased or dead trees. We have the value adjustment here. We have the city arborist responsibilities more clearly defined here in section 5. We have the tree removal permit, and in this section, we're basically creating the criteria for permitting and clearly defining it. And then tree conservation plans in subsection 3, we define and strengthen that. Also the pre-conference, the pre-construction conference is defined and strengthened here. No changes in subsection 2. Subsection 6. This defines the tree conservation plan, what it takes to make that applicable and acceptable. In section 7, we do the same thing with the public portal. We're making this information available to the public. Again, in C is more about public notice, making sure that when permits are issued, that they are clearly visible at construction sites. Surface parking lot, we changed the values to keep in line again with the new metric. Otherwise, no changes. Administrative setbacks, 118, no changes. Utility companies, 119, no change, except for E, where we strike moderate for risk to just higher risk trees. Violations and penalties. We are almost at the end, but we did add quite a bit here too. This section here, before we added this, the only recourse was withholding a C of O, certificate of occupancy. We also, as with other violations of the UDO, want to be able to administer stop work orders. And that's here. And in section B, we strengthened the penalty for non-compliance. we have stronger language in C. In D, we clarify the UDO administrator's authority. In E, we clearly define the penalties and how to find them. In this document, you will not see actual monetary penalties. They are referred to as being in the penalty table and in the administrative standards. And that's where we'll actually, the city gets in the nuts and bolts of the dollars and cents of it. But we make reference to it here. And then the appeals process. So the first part is unchanged. You go to the UDO administrator. The second part is we are suggesting the tree board be the second course of appeal. And after that, the ultimate appeal would be the ZBA, as in all items of the UDO could go to the ZBA as the final backstop. But we do suggest that the arborist would sit on or be present for those ZBA appeals that are based around the tree ordinance. So that is it in a nutshell. I'm going to close that and open this here. And I am going to shortly ask Ash to kind of share his screen as we go through this, because as we discuss these things, I want to be engaged in the conversation. Also, if we need to make some changes, there are a couple typos too that, you know, we've combed over this document so many times, but there are some things that I see that we'll need to change. I'm going to ask Ash to share his version of this, and if he wouldn't mind on the fly, make changes as we discuss it, if that's okay with everyone. Any questions at this point?
Can someone confirm that my share is working?
It is. I can see it. Can everyone else? Okay, so I would suggest to keep this flowing, that we go point by point, and if anyone has a comment or question, we will stop. If there is no comment or question, we'll just keep moving on. Section A, clarifying language. Addition of 13 and 14. Section B here, does anyone have a question about why this is 63% now and not 50? If you can, you might want to read Ash's notes here on the side. I think it sums it up best. But if anyone wants to discuss it, we can. But, you know, in 2009, the old studies we used, I believe, don't hold me to this, I could be off by 1 percentage point, but I think it was 46% canopy coverage. The study that they just recently did go back to 2010. So we have an apple to almost apple comparison, and their metric rated it at 57%. So their system and methodology is 10 points higher. When it was 46, 47%, the city knew there needed to be an increase in coverage, and they raised it to 50. So to keep that in line, if it was 57 by the old metric, we would have been at 63, and that's how we came up with that number. And we use that same adjustment throughout. In every percentage that you see, in almost every percentage that you see, we use that same factor. So there is no, we are not asking for more than was in the original TO. We are just asking to keep it congruent, because now we're using a different system in the interdev system. Part C talks about the public tree information portal.
Have you guys come across another municipality that's implemented or developed public portal like what you guys have envisioned here?
Not to my knowledge, not exactly like that. Does MJ, do you want to take that? I'm sorry, Annie, was somebody speaking?
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself, but I didn't.
Okay.
Trees Atlanta and has been working with the city of Atlanta to not create a portal per se, but create the reporting line for, and it's quarterly between the arborist department and, to make that regular reporting. And it turns out they had the city had to create, a better system internally to do that. And so we want to encourage that, but we feel that the transparency needs to be publicly accessible.
Well,
so that would necessitate a portal, I would say.
I don't know. I mean, there are two issues here. One is the transparency, and then two is just the granularity and the nature of the data that you all are asking for. I mean, I totally agree with the transparency issue. That can be easily remedied, but just by changing the first sentence to read, the city arborist shall prepare a publicly available report. Right. But I guess my real question is what we're asking for here, which strikes me as a lot.
Well, I could just add this is what in our earlier conversations, we discussed an urban forest master plan, something that as being necessary. So this would be part of that. The portal can also take a lot of, we'll have to work with the city on this, obviously. It could take on a lot of faces. One thing I foresee is, one, we need to have a tree census. That's something that needs to be done, a tree survey map. The portal can be simply a GIS layer that documents and inventories our trees.
But
that
it's
in
permitting
conjunction
data.
with the report, with robust reporting, like you're saying, David, would probably satisfy what we're referring to here.
See, what we found with the 2020 data was that there was a lot of information missing about that is normally found in the permit. And so if we can beef that up, make the database robust, have the reporting start, it just seems that you could take one more step technologically and make that,
Yeah, and it doesn't have to start today. I think, David, one of the things we can do is work with the city on finding a methodology that would work, because it should be kind of, if people could fill out the form online, right? That form ought to be tied to a database in some way that it automatically populates. And then you start documenting via the permitting process in some ways, or the canopy studies, those things. And we're recommending that they do this, but I think there are ways to get them to the point of being able to do this.
Hey, so I agree with all that. I just think we can say it in a more direct, concise manner.
I think you need to
shall prepare a publicly available database. I mean, I'm just trying to make, we want our comments to be as impactful and as possible, and obviously we want them to be accepted by the city. So, to the extent we can be direct and unambiguous and practical with the feedback, I think that would work.
I hear what you're saying. So I have a question so that we can kind of see what that language would look like potentially. Basically, the information we're discussing should contain sufficient public information for the public to evaluate the effectiveness of the section, right? And it's going to include a tree survey map, which I think is very important. I think we kind of think we'll agree about that. And including a searchable database of trees, which is easily done on GIS, as well as the records of the tree permits. So basically, what I'm saying is, do you think any of that is too granular, or that you'd like to remove or add to?
Does a tree survey map currently exist?
We have only for street trees, so it would be an expansion of that.
A considerable expansion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's something to think about.
But using the word portal draws all that together to an interface. You're really talking about an interface, David, at which you can either link to the map, you can link to the permits, or you can link to so a portal kind of pulls those three together, and it's an interface you're talking about.
The other thing to keep in mind on that, David, is that it is a big investment to start, but it leads to less work down the road. So instead of having 15 people call Kay about a tree that they see going down to get the details, they can just be sent to that portal to get that information.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't mean to beat this to death. I'm not arguing any of that. I think it just feels like what's the original language in paragraph C, if that's made publicly available and easily accessible, doesn't that solve our problem? Doesn't that kind of get at what we're asking
Well,
for?
it's not
it doesn't-
happening for
It
starters.
doesn't
No,
define the type of
I
data.
understand that, Mary Jane. This is new.
Yeah.
This is new.
So,
And I think
and-
we want, you know, it would be great if the city does what it says it's going to do here. That would be a considerable improvement over, you know, Ash having to submit a public information request to get, you know, a bunch of spreadsheets that are incomplete. Like, obviously that's not good enough.
Mhm.
But what they've laid out here in their original language, they actually execute on that. That's a considerable improvement over what's being done today.
Yeah.
David, I think it's okay to ask and it's okay for them to say no. There's no problem, I don't think, with us asking for something we think is important. But remember, they're going to come back in a conversation and they may say, we are unable to do this at this time because, and then I think it's incumbent upon Natural Systems to go back and maybe start finding some resources in tech. They have Computing for Good program. They have a number of programs. Then we can take that assignment and work with them. But I think we need to ask for things and allow them to say no and provide us with a why.
So how about this? Here's an idea. How about we break that paragraph C into two different paragraphs? Make C make the first half of C its own paragraph. So
And the tree
publicly
portal itself.
available report, you know, available through an online tree information portal or an online portal. Period. New paragraph. Now start talking about a recommendation for you know, tree survey map and the other graphics, which would be A, new, and B, a considerable investment in time and resources to stand up. So that way, if they say no, they just strike that portion, but accept the recommended changes to the language that's already there.
You guys, could this be something that is reported directly to the tree board quarterly? And I guess the ultimate goal may be that if we see a problem, we want to see it sooner and we want to rectify it. If it's just publicly available, there's no getting to a solution. But if that data is going also to the tree board in a direct reporting line, then people can talk about a solution. Why did that happen? What changes can we make now to make sure that doesn't continue to happen? So I just like to make that reporting line, if you guys are in agreement.
I think for the tree board, they should be paying attention to what's on the public thing anyway. I don't think you need to add
yeah,
Kay
it
doing
might
a
just be-
quarterly report to them. The tree
Excellent.
board got the information. If it's publicly available, they should just be doing that.
Yeah, this, I think what Ash just did kind of addresses what you're saying, David, in case we have a massive strike through. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen, though. Keep in mind that, you know, even if we left it the way it was, hopefully in our conversations, they'd be able to go in with a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer and take out what they needed to. But this definitely makes it easier. I agree. Can we move on to D?
Can I ask a question on this one?
Yes, please.
When you do the permit, does the permit have why is the tree being removed?
Sometimes.
Well, I
Sometimes.
think the reason,
Yeah.
maybe a little more detail would be helpful. Are you just doing it because you don't like maintenance of the trees? Are you doing a construction project? Is the tree diseased? Are you
Yes.
you not like doing the maintenance, you know, because you're dropping leaves and catkins and it's on your car? The reason I'm saying that would be useful is then you can gear education toward, you know, to create a culture of trees for the city. So
Yeah,
I'm just
that's great. It's a great question.
throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And Steve,
It's all
I'll
on
answer
there, I
that.
believe, Steve. Yeah.
I'll answer that real quick. As you'll see in the document, there are several areas where it talks about the tree plan and tree permits that define, when and for what reason and what type of reporting needs to be done. So I think it's all in there, a comprehensive on a case-by-case basis. And also this tree portal would, since it's incorporating permit data, you would theoretically, if it's when it's fully built out, you would know why you lost specific trees or why they were cut down, whether it was just were they over canopy and allowed to remove it for construction, or was it dead, diseased, and dying? That information would be available.
Well, guys, the city's original language also says that explicitly.
Mhm.
Reason for removal or planting.
Right.
So
Exactly.
all they've got to do is do what they say they're going to do, and we get the detail that
And
Steve
report
was
it.
asking for.
Correct. Yeah. And you'll see it in this document too. You'll see it as we go on. So D is the information sessions. We call for 2 information sessions. This is right after the tree ordinance passes. That's why obviously this is standard practice anyway, that they would probably do, but we kind of spell it out here in the ordinance. And then ongoing yearly. People don't really understand the ordinance as it is now, so I think this is an important component. 912, we're getting into applicability and exemptions. Basically, in this first part here, this is the first time the city talks about DBH. The 6 inches or greater becomes a protected tree. The language here, protected tree, just kind of defines that. It's a contractual legalese, so that every time we use the term protected tree, we kind of refer it to the 6 inches, and in a couple other areas we use the term so that we have a blanket term for protected trees. This clarifies you don't need this anymore. Obviously in B, you can see how it's already being used. The memorandum of understanding, we strengthened this just to basically say that that it should be no less protective if there is a memorandum of understanding, or if there is the city manager deems that there needs to be an exemption, that it should be no less protective than what is stated in this section for the exemption to apply. Otherwise, basically, number 1 would just be a caveat to do whatever you wanted to do on the city level. Number 2, this is again about database reporting from the removal of trees. This talks about
Number 3, Rich, I don't think any change was actually made there. I'm not
no,
sure.
it wasn't. I was just going to say, what did we change there? Nothing. Thank you, Ash. I appreciate that.
Formatting thing.
Thank you, sir. And the expedited right, this here, I don't know if anyone wants to discuss this. This is, originally this verbal authorization is for a dead, diseased, and dying tree, a high-risk tree. Well, it actually was a moderate to high-risk tree, but down in 1, we change it to moderate. To high, we strike moderate, okay? So this is, like, you can remove a moderate tree, but this is for an emergency removal, okay? The emergency removal in the original TO revision that we first got basically required verbal authorization from K or from the city, and then within 72 hours you needed to file the permit. And what we're saying is we should have something in writing, whether it be even email or whatever the case is, something in writing from K giving authorization, and then following through with the 72-hour filing of the permit.
And the discussion on that, just so everybody's clear, is it could be text, it could be email, so it can be done just as quick as verbal, but there needs to be some kind of a paper trail.
And it's not just to say, okay, we need a paper trail, but it's also for making sure that these things come into compliance, because it would be very, very easy to, start removing trees and not informing the city. Once K is informed, and it's in writing, then it's on the radar. It just makes it a little bit more enforceable. And the follow through with the 72-hour permitting. Okay, and that's just, we put that down there in that part. And then D, this is affordable housing. So basically, what this is protecting against is, we have a new housing ordinance, affordable housing ordinance, which would require, I believe, all housing units over 10 units to have 10% of their units be affordable. And based on the original language here, one of those units could file for an exemption from the tree ordinance. So we want, we saw where they were going with this. We want affordable housing. It's expensive and they have to, watch their pennies. We want them to be able to potentially, get some relief if economically it becomes too difficult to develop a parcel. But we want to make sure it's fully affordable housing. So run by the DHA and 100% affordable units in order to get that relief. Okay, administrative standards. This is basically codifying the administrative standards, which, they did, but not strong enough. This just basically says the administrative standards is incorporated herein, and that's going to be a guiding document.
Guys, I'm thinking, how this compares to the functions of like the zoning board of appeals, right? Does the ZBA have an explicit set of criteria that they use when determining whether to grant a waiver or not?
Yes.
Or is it largely subjective?
No, it's not subjective. To my knowledge, it's mostly based around the term hardship. So you as a homeowner, for any reason, for any variance of the UDO, would need to go to the ZBA and show hardship. And that's usually economic hardship, but can be other forms of hardship. And we bring the ZBA in the very, very final 9.1.21, which talks about appeals.
So the reason I ask is based on what you just said, Rich. Mm-hmm. It looks like the original language was more or less consistent with how the ZBA functions.
This is not ZBA, though. This is the administrator.
Proposed a kind of an additional level of stringency, and I guess I wonder whether that's reasonable or not.
Let me take a look at that too, and see if we can see where, if I can see where you're going there.
So yeah, so we're talking 913A. Mm-hmm. The city arborist may waive or modify administrative standards based on, skip over the red, a bona fide hardship. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you just said? Is how kind of the ZBA guides their decision-making process?
Right.
May I offer something on that?
Yes, go ahead, Ash.
That's a great question. That's exactly right, David. The reason it's not an appropriate standard for the arborist to apply is because it is the variance standard.
Right.
We need a higher standard for an administrative modification done on the fly, essentially. You need a higher legal standard and a different standard. Otherwise, you'd just be going for a variance without going to the ZBA.
Right.
So it would create an end run around the ZBA process.
Right. So, that's for them. That hardship ruling is for the ZBA. The administrator and the arborist have to have a more clearly delineated reason. And that's what we attempted to do here.
So we need to limit the discretion of the arborist so they're not acting as the ZBA, essentially, and judging hardship on the fly.
I hear you. I guess I just thinking out loud, I wonder how practical that is, because I mean, throughout this document and throughout the administrative standards document that we'll be talking about next week, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of subjectivity. particularly when it comes to, assessing the health of a tree. And, there's a lot of, there's a tremendous amount of deference that's given to certified arborists to make their determination as to, the health of a tree. So I guess, how practical is it for us to try to quantify or make objective what is inherently kind of a subjective process?
Well, I would just say about that, keep in mind that when you have a dead, diseased, and dying tree, it wouldn't even come into this. It wouldn't even come into the UDO administrator's purview. It would be in the arbor. If you had an arborist that came in and said this tree is at high risk of failure, you would be in a different section. You'd be dealing with a different section of the UDO, and you'd be, if it's high risk, you actually could file with just an expedited form and a 72 and apply for the application 72 hours after removal. So they wouldn't require any sort of administrative approval at all. So in that situation, so assessments of quality by the arborist, I don't think will come in here. I think this starts to get into the muddy area of asking the administrator to cut you some slack, basically, for some reason, right? That comes up. I mean, this is, things come up on a certain parcel that maybe you can't predict. And so this is the first level, the first place you go. Well, you go to the arborist, you get no relief. You can go to the administrator, you get no relief. You go to the board and ultimately the ZBA. So I think the wording is pretty good. It does kick the can a little bit into the administrative standards, but in a way that's nice because it will allow us inside those standards to expand on this. Without citing the administrative standards, we would have to expand this in depth here. And I think that one can get a little muddy, and two, it required a lot more work at this point for that.
And I think what the intent is, so that if this does happen, the recompense end is stronger as well. And especially if we move toward DBH as a measurement, the ecosystem services are measured to the point where you have to replace back, with alternative compliance, I guess, but that moderate category is very, very wide. And we need to tighten it up if we can.
So ultimately, David, if you're comfortable with it, it's really asking for the development of the criteria where the UDO administrator would be allowed to step in. Basically, it's saying, okay, the UDO administrator is going to be able to grant a administrative variance for XYZ PDQ. Right, and that's what this is saying here. We haven't defined it yet, but we will in the administrative standards. As opposed, and this is common in the UDO, right? I mean, when you're talking about permeability, there is clear definitions as to what the UDO administrator can do. Believe me, I know. I've went to John several times, and he said no, go to the ZBA. And why he said that was because his hands are tied, because it's very specific as to what he can grant an administrative variance for.
Could we ask Ash to put that? Yeah, could we ask Ash to put that in plain language, what you just said, Rich, in terms of the process, i.e. we have this, then we can go to the administrative standard. We're trying to clarify
I
that.
think we do say that at the very end under the appeals process. This is not really talking about the whole appeals process. It's only talking about what the administrator can do, what the UDO administrator can do.
So going back up to that paragraph, thanks, Ash. So the part that's been redlined out, are we not just asking for those conditions to be spelled out in more detail
in the administrative standards?
So why strike that? Why not keep it and then say, specific criteria, these, specific criteria for each of these conditions shall be developed by?
I think just to avoid confusion in language, I think it was just more words than you needed if you were already putting the codification of the administrative standards, I think sometimes you can kind of hang yourself with too much language. Ash can maybe speak to that better.
I hate to repeat myself, David. You're incorporating the variance standard here, and it's just not appropriate. If you meet the hardship standard, you're entitled to a variance, right? So you need a different level of legal, a more restrictive legal standard to get an administrative variance, something that ties John's hands just enough, not too much, but gives him some meaningful discretion. This bona fide hardship is just way too broad here.
Yeah, but that's just one. That's just one of several conditions.
But it's everything the way they drafted it, as far as bona fide created by.
Unusual, extraordinary, property.
This is a variance standard. This is the ZBA standard, and to give John that discretion, I mean, it gives way too much.
He doesn't have that discretion for most other things in the UDO. So to me, it's giving short shrift to trees. We don't do that with permeability. So why would we do that with trees?
And it makes the variance process meaningless if you can just get it from John.
Right.
So we need to give John, and it's a task force thing, on these specific, maybe it's setbacks. And as Mary Jane pointed out, if there's full recompense of ecosystem services, those kinds of criteria that are really fact specific, because you're right, this is very fact specific. And I think it needs more expertise on a technical front, as opposed to just importing the variance standard, which just isn't appropriate.
And I'd imagine the section in the administrative standards is going to be fairly lengthy. I mean, it's going to have a lot of points in there. We'll pull from the administrative standards from other parts of the UDO and kind of look what's being done there, and to help use that to help inform us as we build this out.
And the way that would work is if you're denied your administrative, waiver, you say, no, that creates a hardship, and then you go to the zoning board. You go through the process that leads to the zoning board.
Right.
I was just going to say, if we're successful in getting the pre-planning tree process enacted, then we will probably see less of
That's very true.
these calls, because they'll be
Right.
planning for the trees and having that conversation.
Right. Although sometimes in that process, they're going to know they're going to need to get an administrative variance, right? It's just earlier on in the process. So it may not necessarily remove the amount of requests John gets, but it will be earlier in the whole process. And homeowners will know if they need to escalate beyond the city and go to the ZBA. Does that sound reasonable to you, David, after hearing the explanations as to why we put that in there?
Yeah, no, it's fine. Ash, I wonder if it might make sense to spell some of this out in a little bit more detail in the comments on the side.
I was actually just
how you've talked it through makes sense, but just kind of reading the edits as written, some of that detail or some of the kind of the rationale isn't apparent.
It'll be good to have it there in the document, both for where
Smart.
we're sending it and in the future.
Yeah, excuse me 1 second.
But some of that conversation, since this is being recorded, can be shared and viewed by folks like John later too.
Yeah, I really appreciate David's comments, because he is anticipating some of the comments or some of the discussion we might have later. So thank you, David.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, it's obvious that a tremendous amount of work has been put into this, and I, for one, really appreciate that. And what I'm trying to do is just kind of understand the thought process behind some of these edits, and to the extent possible, like you said, Andy,
Yeah.
anticipate.
Please, David,
This is really impressive.
don't and thank you, but don't stop your critiques of this, because I really couldn't wait to get to this meeting today and see what your feedback and all of the ESB members' feedback was, because I mean, we're in the beginning of the feedback loop. You know, we're talking to the choir right here. So believe me, please voice your questions or concerns. Continue to voice your questions or concerns. So let's move on to tree species list. The tree species list, if you're not familiar with it, is very lengthy. It probably needs to be modified. They know it does. This gives them 90 days to modify that list, which is referenced and therefore by reference attached to the TO. In the next section, 914 top line just gives a little clarity. As I discussed before, I don't know why it's pink like that, but it basically, we added that it's we're not counting any tree bigger than 4 inches, which is pretty nice. If it's bigger than 4 inches, you can count it as canopy. But trees that are infested with invasives will not have a canopy credit. But that's easily solved. Basically, it helps maintenance, right? If you know that if you go onto a site, and a lot of sites that are being developed out of ivy all over the stuff, it's going to be the builder's responsibility to clean that up, which is pretty easy. So I thought that was a nice addition.
And that's just to go along with the tree preservation, where they have to put the fencing up around
Right.
to prevent compaction. Well, we all know that this is just almost as much danger to a tree as compaction. So
Right. The green, I think, is in error. Is it, Ash, the canopy projected over? Is that, why is, I don't know why that's green down. I don't think we made a change there.
That's right. No change. I will.
Thank you, sir.
Apologies for those.
Great. Section C, as defined by the tree species list.
I'm sorry. Can I just ask a quick question? Going back to that edit about trees that are impacted by invasives.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if diseased or dying or otherwise unhealthy trees are they counted toward canopy or no?
That's a great question. Yes, they normally are counted toward canopy.
Okay.
To my knowledge. You know, because sometimes a diseased tree stands for a long time, the homeowner doesn't want to remove it. Let's say it's not in striking distance of a home or really valuable property. You know, I've seen oak trees that were diseased live 5-10 years. Maybe the homeowner doesn't want to remove it. Maybe they don't have $4,000 to remove it. You know, so they leave it standing. So I do think we count it, because if you didn't count it, think about that. Where do you, a lot of these lots, when that tree goes down, you have to plant another tree very close to where that one was. So if you didn't count it as canopy and you had a violation, but yet the tree was still standing, could be a problem. I think with the invasive, this is just a way to kind of maintain trees.
I agree, but it at the same time, it's also a little bit punitive, because if you say you have an elderly low-income homeowner,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to tell them that they have to pay to have invasive removed from their property if they want to meet the canopy requirement?
Great point.
I understand.
No, great point. But I would say this, I would say that really wouldn't come into play, because the only time the city is going to know that, be looking at your canopy to see if you're in compliance, is if you're filing for a tree permit for one reason or other. You'd be a construction, normally construction. So if it was an emergency removal, of course, dead, disease, and dying, then it's not going to matter anyway that it has a vine on it, because you're removing it. So I couldn't see this affecting people of lower income, because they probably wouldn't be the group that'd be filing for building permits.
yeah, and this came from the city of Atlanta. It's in the current edition of their, and I think how they deal with that is they have part of their tree fund go to lower income people.
So that's great, Mary Jane. I didn't know that. Ash, it might be worth adding that as a comment.
We could also make that part of
in the tree bank,
since it'll be year round, the Martin Luther King Service Project. So
absolutely,
if somebody needs assistance, they're a low income elderly person, that's one of the things that MLK Junior Service Project does, because that's an easy thing for volunteers to do, cut those vines.
That, yes, and I think we can actually spell it out even more underneath the tree bank. And under uses for tree bank, we could spell out the use for those funds potentially helping out some lower income folks, because I don't think we have that in there.
So should we hold that comment for the tree bank
Oh,
section?
you could make a comment that and then say, you know.
So I would say if it's true that Trees Atlanta or that the city of Atlanta doesn't give canopy credit to trees that are impacted by invasive species, which Mary Jane, I think that's what you just said. If that's true, I think that should be noted here.
Yes.
Yeah. So I will look though and see if they count dead, disease, and dying. They use DBH, so they call it sticks in the ground. It's not canopy, but if they're counting trees per acre, they don't count the ones covered in invasives, but it's a good question that you raised. Do they count ones that are otherwise
Right.
coming down one way or the other?
What's also important in making that determination is that in the current ordinance or is that in the proposed ordinance for City of Atlanta?
Good point.
Right.
So I'm sorry.
It's in their second draft, so they've had comment from, and now it's in the January version. So the city has come back and kept that in.
Yeah. I'm sorry, y'all. Per our current ordinance, dead, disease, and dying trees are not counted for canopy. I want to ask what you mean by impacted and how how you define that and how they're kind of regular standards for that determination.
And
so David, in terms of them not being counted, aren't they counted when we do the satellite imagery and determine how much canopy we have?
Well, okay, so this is where you really do need to look at the administrative standards and how canopy is actually measured on site. It's not using satellite imagery.
Oh, no, I didn't mean on site. I meant just in terms of our general goals.
Right. So
So
it's
like
in our general goals, yes.
In terms of how much we've got as a city, but then we're discounting it when we look on the site.
right. Correct.
Yeah, that would be true.
The language they use for impacted, and we could use this, is that it's all the way up into the crown of the tree and covering the trunk. So they do have specifics.
Yeah, and if you could add that.
And I guess one question, maybe we kick this to next week, but on page 16 of the administrative standards, they reference a tree rating guide, and part of the one element of a tree when it's being rated by an arborist or forester is the condition, and
Right.
there could be uncorrectable major defects, correctable defects. I guess the question for the group is, if we go into that tree rating guide, how are invasive species treated? Are they considered a correctable defect or a minor correctable defect? I guess in other words, is this issue already accounted for in the tree rating guide that's included in the administrative standard? We don't have to answer that now because I know we're going to focus on it next week, but that might be the right place to really flesh this out and ensure that it's considered.
Interesting point. I think some redundancy is
could
not
you
necessarily
repeat
bad.
that so I make sure I get that into the notes? Because I didn't quite catch all of it.
So the administrative standards make reference to a tree rating guide, which is to be used by certified arborists or registered foresters to basically assess the condition of a tree, and to determine its overall health and the overall benefits that it delivers. And one of the criteria that a tree should be assessed on is the condition of that tree. And a poor tree would have a condition that they describe as an uncorrectable major defect. A tree that is fair would have a correctable defect. A tree that's good would have minor correctable defects, and then a tree that's of high quality would have no known defects.
So I suggest that we put after the word credit on A, we could put something like it shall be eligible for tree canopy cover credit unless otherwise exempted by the administrative standards. For example, example like dead, diseased, or dying, or other condition issues. And then it's kind of like, you know, incorporates everything, because you're right, David, it would be if an arborist is out there looking at the tree and assessing the condition, if it's loaded with ivy, it's going to get a poor rating, right? So we may want to just kind of refer.
I think that we should probably dig into that next week, because I think it's an important, you know, you guys are raising an important issue here by bringing up the invasives.
So you want to just make a note on the side then, there, Ash, and we'll just leave it at that.
Is this what we're getting at, folks?
Yeah, i.e. dead, diseased, dying, infested.
And then are we removing the invasive sentence at the end of that subsection?
I don't know.
I think we should keep it until next week, until we have a chance to figure out how invasives play into that tree rating guide.
Right. I think this is good what you wrote there as the comment. It kind of adds a little light to why that's there. And then if we need to change it, we can change. It's, you know, it's understood where we're going.
And we all need to, yeah, this is our first preview of the challenges of measuring by a canopy, and we'll revisit that later in terms of the benefits of DBH over canopy. We're starting to get into those details.
Yeah, we will want to ensure that they're not removing via Roundup or other means, and that's language we can include in the administrative, right? Okay.
We would have to deal with a lot of this gray area if we go with DBH, but we'll get to that later.
So let's move on to C then. So we're just talking about understory trees. Basically, we wanted to add as defined by the species list to kind of add some clarity to what is an understory tree, because the species list does separate them. And then we want to exclude shrubs and other greenery that are not considered canopy. That's obvious, but it wasn't written there. So we included that. No change. Oh, here, the 10%. So is there any questions on this? Or, I don't want to delve into something that everyone kind of understands where we're coming from here. The 10% is too restrictive for somebody to try to maintain. So if you lose a large oak tree and you plant a new one, you only get 160 feet of credit. And so you would literally on a 7 or 8,000 square foot lot have to plant a dozen large oak trees at 10%. Okay.
Yeah, that struck me as odd. Also.
You know, yeah. So we didn't suggest a percentage. We just said, you know, the percentage needs to be much higher, probably in the range of 50, 60% or more. It used to be 100% given. So I understand why you don't want 100, but you know, 10 is a bit much.
I will say that this. Sorry, I've just recently read the Atlanta. They could give 2 times. They count twice a tree that is in vegetated green infrastructure. Maybe that's because, as we mentioned in a prior meeting, that tree is trans-evaporating at a higher rate, perhaps, if its feet are wet. But that's one way we could make that a little bit softer. I don't know.
Okay, but this is talking more generally, right? This is just talking about you planting a tree anywhere, right? You know, what do you get for it? So I think there's going to be other areas when we're talking about GAR that down the road here that we're looking at those types of credits for infrastructure, green infrastructure. All right, let's move down, Ash, please. So this in the requirements here kind of just expands the first definition of that, you know, basically saying modifications to existing protected trees shall require a plan. So it's encompassing all protected trees at this point. The expanded definition would mean trees that are planted to meet the requirements. So if you plant a tree to meet your canopy requirements and it is, 3-inch DBH, it falls underneath the protected tree. So we want to make sure that was a more inclusive definition.
So Rich, when I read 915A last night, I was trying to get my head around exactly what's meant here. When you say a modification, are you including pruning?
That's a good point. The language may need to be tweaked because it's not totally clear what was meant by that. So
Urban.
how about
Proper term.
thank you, Ash.
Yeah, okay.
These edits are intended to conform this subsection to the subsection above that says you can't remove or disturb a protected tree. Full stop.
Yeah.
Without a permit. That's all.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's much better though. Good point, David.
Thank you, David.
In B, we also removed the moderate when we're talking about trees at risk. It's untreatably disease infested or at high critical or risk rating.
And just so we don't miss it, it's really important. There's a comment on 915.
On 915A?
On 915 here, the recommendation, all of the edits you see to 915 are sort of contingent if we're stuck with a canopy metric that the city has proposed, but there's a strong recommendation that all of this be converted to DBH, and that's a note here. And DBH is the industry standard, the regional standard, and the committee, I think, is working on.
Ash, do you want to make a little note next to this? Please see side comments. Just draw some attention to that.
Yeah, that's a good call.
And is it fair to assume that the reason the city wants to stick with canopy is because it's easier? Because it can be done via aerial photo. You can't. You have to actually be on site to do a canopy assessment or lot coverage assessment based on DBH. You actually have to physically measure the tree, which you don't have to do for a canopy, right?
I think that's correct, David.
No,
The downside to it
yeah.
is that when you're looking at canopy, you can only look at a certain time of year where DBH can do any time. And that's one of the reasons that once they actually get on site and are assessing trees, they switch to DBH. And so we've got this sort of mismatch between here's what we're using, tree canopy, and here's what we're actually using when we get on site, DBH.
So I don't think that's actually accurate. So the tree canopy study that was just completed uses 1 meter resolution aerial imagery that's taken at the same time every year. If somebody submits for a tree removal permit or a building permit, and the arborist goes out and then they measure canopy on site using the methodologies described in the administrative standards. And so they are on site measuring the tree canopy. They're not using the aerial GIS imagery, which may have a little bit greater room
right,
for
but
error.
can they really do that when it's a different season and the tree's canopy is down? Are they just looking basically at where the branches are?
So I mean, they're using industry best practices, and they've been trained extensively to do that.
Yeah, we looked this up, Michael, and critical root zone is a factor of DBH. You have to have the DBH to calculate that. So that's what they're doing when they're, and the critical root zone is related to the stretch of the canopy, but it's not exactly the same measurement.
I think one of the things that needs to be determined at this point, if the standards have changed based on what MJ is saying, then we need to be with the current industry standards. I appreciate the Georgia Tech canopy study. I mean, it was extremely helpful, but it also didn't drill down, as he's commented, on some of the information we gained by using DBH.
Right. And it's not, let's remember, we're always probably going to use canopy to determine our overall, if we're meeting our overall city goal. because we, you know, until eventually, if we had a portal that was robust enough, but that would report, you know, have a tree census that was complete, but that is, you know, probably not even beyond the scope of what we intended in the portal. So we'll always use the canopy to know where we're at as a city. The DBH and on-site canopy measurements are really a function of permitting, of looking at lot requirements on a lot by lot basis. So yes, it absolutely can be done in the winter. You go to the end of a branch and you calculate it. So yes, it can be. But as you said, Annie, it's not the way the new and revised modern tree ordinances are going. They're going with DBH for a lot of advantages. So this is a huge conversation, but for the sake of time, I suggest we go forward. We made a note here, and we'll definitely be expanding on this with Hugh and Kay next week. In the meantime, I hope to have a little bit more language that we might suggest for them to help, because there is part of what you said. It's easier this way, David, because it's all consistent. You know, it's just all canopy. We would need to then break it out between canopy measurements as a goal, but then DBH as the metrics used for the permitting and lot coverage requirements. And so the language to do that is a little tricky. And I think that's one of the things that they steered away from, or why they've steered away from that. So we'll see if we can offer some useful suggestions by next week. So can we move down to commercial and high density residential and institutional? Ash, what is our change on number 4 there? We changed the metric to meet.
Correct.
And then what is the addition there? Addressing alternative compliance?
A tree removal permit or conservation. Yeah, that's just cleaning up language. There's nothing really substantive.
Right. Okay, very good. That's a language cleanup. And here we have a percentage change. This talked about the tree bank, and the reason we wanted, it was 50%. We wanted to lower this drastically. And the reason, the tree bank is great, but we don't want to let the tree bank become a de facto. Some developers, this is definitely for developers too, they have very deep pockets. We don't want the tree bank to come into the de facto thing you pay into in order to strip a lot. And if you're allowed to strip 50% of the trees by paying into the bank, if you had a 60% lot coverage requirement, now all of a sudden you got a 30. There's no way we're going to meet our city goals by allowing that to happen. Okay, single family residential, we have a 65% goal here. This is not adjusted exactly to the metric because frankly, it just kind of would have been too high. So we put it at 65 instead of what would have been in the 70s, but I think it's reasonable. And we also want to protect 75% of the existing tree canopy. And that's just language cleaned up there. E is the next big substantive change. We added the city schools. Does anyone have a question or comment on this? No?
Do we feel that this allows the city to have more trees on school lots? And I just feel like this is going back to another conversation with Trees Atlanta. They made a third category, which was affordable housing and institutional, meaning schools. And the goal was to have more trees at those sites because the ecosystem services are needed. Do you feel like we achieved that here? Is that our intent?
Well, I see the intent as really throwing the school a little bone, to be honest with you. Not about mandating the schools to plant more. This is actually a relief for them, because what it's saying is basically saying, you know, if you have a wooded lot, okay, that is meeting the standards, that you have to continue to meet those standards as exemplified in 915 and 916. But what it's also allowing is if you have a school bus depot, or if you have a parking lot, okay, you do not, and your coverage is 10% there, you do not have to come up to the requirement. You just cannot have less than, you can't go below what you already have, the minimum canopy that's already there. And this helps the school because there are situations the school has now. Let's face it, let's say you were looking at Decatur High School and Decatur High School had to file for a permit to do something. Then they would have to come up to compliance. There's no way they're going to be able to come up to compliance. So it's pragmatic.
Right. And if it were under this new, we would have some kind of recompense that allows for a green roof or something that brings the standard of ecosystem services up. You know, maybe it's their parking lot trees have to be canopy trees or something. Anyway, those are details, but I see what you're saying. I think they're already doing it.
They're already doing it. You know, I mean, the school system is pretty progressive, you know, they're putting solar where they can put solar. They're trying to do what they can do. I'm just very hesitant to put more restrictions on the school system to come up to meet some of these standards, knowing the existing lots that they have right now and the coverage that's on them. Listen, we're not really potentially going to be, if we build another school, it would be one school in the next 10 years. That would be the extent of it. So it's not like the school system is the ones going around developing Decatur. So I would just kind of put that into perspective and kind of not do anything in this ordinance to unduly burden CSD.
Also along those same lines, I think there are other strategies besides regulation to get more trees planted at the schools. And I think that parents at the schools and even school administrators right now are open to those. So those are the venues where we should really be pushing those.
That's well said, Michael. Very well said. I agree with that. Okay, Ash, when you're ready, we'll scroll down. Okay.
I'm going to add the same note applies to this section regarding a transition.
Very good. Yep. So this is the second area where DBH would come into play. There's probably going to be a couple more areas too that are in here.
So just one comment on this paragraph. I think the sentence, all trees planted or conserved to meet tree canopy replacement requirements shall be protected trees. I think that's problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, that's not consistent with the edits that you guys made at the very beginning of the document, where you made explicit the definition of a protected tree. You know, something that being 6 inches DBH or greater. So it's possible that a tree that's replanted as part of a replanting scheme, it could be 4 inches DBH or 3 inches DBH.
Right.
So right there, if you're calling that a protected tree, it's inconsistent with the definition that you've already established.
So here's where this comes in. I think you
just one other comment real quick, Rich. Sorry.
Yes. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The other thing I was going to say is, if you go to the administrative standards, and it might even be in this document as well, I can't remember, but there are some pretty extensive requirements that are laid out for the maintenance of trees that are planted as part of a tree canopy replacement plan. And it makes pretty clear that if a tree is removed, or if a tree dies due to neglect or whatever, it has to be replaced. So aside from the kind of the concern I have about inconsistencies with the definition, I also think it's redundant based on the requirements that are already spelled out elsewhere.
Okay, so it's a good point. I would just say that I don't read it as inconsistent. It's just adding on to. So when you first say protected trees 6 inches in diameter is a protected tree. Now you're also expanding the definition of protected tree to be all trees that are planted in order to meet the requirements, which of course could be 2.5 inch caliber, right? So basically what you're saying here is protected trees are X, Y, and Z. So the beginning of the document starts out with, okay, existing trees are 6 inches. But and this goes on to just say, and all trees that are planted to meet the requirement are also protected trees. So it's not really a conflict, it's just an expansion of the definition.
So
And by-
that's not, okay, I hear what you're saying, that's not how you would write a regulation. You would establish a clear, consistent definition up front and run with that. So, one simple approach would be to redefine at the beginning what a protected tree is, to include this, if you guys, if that's the path
Interesting.
you really want to go
Okay.
down. But
Yeah.
I think this is confusing, and I think it's not how you would write a regulation. Just a minor formatting detail.
I guess, David, to address your second question, all the trees planted are eventually going to become, hopefully, protected trees once they hit 6 inches. I think, if you plant a tree pursuant to this section, it should not be allowed that you can chop it down the next day without a permit.
It's already not allowed based on the maintenance requirements in the administrative standard.
But what about after 3 years? What about after the maintenance requirements are over and it's still
Then
only
it
2
would-
inches or 3
Then
inches?
it would be a protected tree, presumably. If you've maintained it properly, it will have grown. It will be 6 inches or greater. And
Oh, maybe not. I mean, an oak tree that you plant that's a 2.5-inch caliber in 3 years is not going to be 6 inches DBH.
And you may need to chop it down the next day, David. And I think if you do, you're going to need to get a permit for that. You may be complying with all your maintenance requirements, but circumstances change. A year later, you need to take that tree out. And that's why it needs to be protected.
I hear you. And what I'm saying is that scenario that hypothetical that you just lay out is already accounted for.
It is accounted
I
for,
don't think the maintenance requirements are going to require you to
but
replace
not
the
enough.
tree.
Yeah, it's not enough. There's loopholes if you just rely on the maintenance requirements in the administrative standards. You can loop out of this. This is more inclusive than that. Yes, it does include what you're talking about, David, but it also includes for any situation. Even after that maintenance bond, lapses. So this is basically what we're saying is that all the work of this tree ordinance, all the things we're saying you need to do to come into compliance, those trees now fall underneath the umbrella of protected trees. I see what you're saying about, the best place to put that would be potentially in the front. However, it does make sense in this subsection because this is what's talking about that. From a legal perspective, I can't say, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if because it's here, it doesn't make sense, but I wouldn't think so. I think for ease of reading perhaps, but I don't think legally, I think legally, I don't know, Ash, what is your take on that?
I think if it adds clarity to the document, David, that's a great suggestion to add it to the definition up top. This ordinance doesn't have a definition section. Concepts are defined sort of ad hoc throughout the document. So yeah, if it helps, that's cool. Legally, it doesn't make a difference where the definition comes in the ordinance.
I just think there needs to be a definition. And I thought
I can add if
to add a definition, but then it changes.
Sure. No, it's a function of how this has gone.
Well, and we have played around with the idea of having a definition section in the administrative standards. Some ordinances have it within the document. It makes it lengthy, it adds pages and pages, but.
Ash, should that say section or ordinance? Should that
section refers to the ordinance. It's
okay.
It's a term of art.
Okay.
Technically, this is all one section of the state code.
Got it.
Yeah, no, David, that's a good point. And Annie has been an advocate for creating a definition section. I'm okay with it, but it's a lot of work so that you don't create inconsistencies between your definitions and your other concepts that are, like, for example, canopy cover credit is a term of art. A whole section is used to define it, many subsections. So we would just be restating those.
Right. Remember, Avondale Estates has it, and it's geared to the residents, frankly. And it's fairly simple. It doesn't go into some of these detailed things that are defined within the context of the ordinance.
I think this is a great thing, Annie, to bring up in our discussions with you and Kay and see if this is something that they'd want to add to the administrative standards.
Sure.
or something they want to be even standalone. If it doesn't hurt you, you don't shoot yourself in the foot legally, like Ash is saying. I completely understand what he's saying. Sometimes less is best. So I think this is a good conversation to have with them to see if this is something that they want to try to compile.
Yeah, the ones I've seen are basically just a dictionary. The details are not laid out in there. It's just, this is what this term.
You think you could be able to preface something like that with some legalese to protect you, to say that these definitions are not, not all inclusive, or that they should not supersede as they're defined in the document itself, but just for general knowledge, you'd think there would be some caveat you could use legally to protect you from creating a loophole.
Right. You can also call it a glossary if you get to make it even easier.
Okay, great. So let's go on. Where are we at, Ash?
So I've incorporated that into a definition now. David, your point is well taken. Should we take this out here now?
Yes.
Okay.
So in the tree planting plan, point B here, section B, basically we're asking for a tree survey, which is basically a land survey that shows the trees, for post-project proposed conditions. So basically without that, I don't see how some of this stuff can be enforceable. It goes on to say that this information from this document, from the permitting document, would be added to the citywide data. The next change is commercial high density residential. We just moved that in line with every other change we've made with percentages based on interdev. So this here gives the city arborist, and D gives the city arborist some ability to, it clarifies her ability to, let's see, what are we saying here, Ash? There's been
this is the alternative compliance scheme.
Alternative compliance. So it gives some latitude to the arborist.
Right, to encourage alternative designs that save more trees.
Mm-hmm.
And then allows an applicant to pay into the tree bank.
Right. And this is where, yes, this bottom part here, I think I got. So this is what's interesting. It allows, if you fall below 50%, so there's a little buffer there too for relief, but if you fall below 50%, you can get offsets from using green infrastructure. And we kind of define that based on the EPA's website, also based on the Seattle's green factor. But we go on to say that you can only use half of that allotment for an offset. And I think I described this in my first run through. We do not want basically entire lots to be scraped and it all made up for by green infrastructure. In theory, it sounds great, but I think in practice, we'd be losing a lot of trees that way. So this allows for green infrastructure, but also allows lots to still keep some trees standing.
And we would need to spell out in the standards, I think it says for tree rating, see administrative standards, but some go as far as to say one canopy tree of certain size equals 800 square feet of green roof, so they standardize it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know when we get to that point. The next section is the same thing for residential. It's the same exact thing that we just basically added on to residential and adjusted the numbers appropriately. Okay. Tree bank.
So sorry.
Mm-hmm.
This may be a stupid question. I'm just trying to get my head around what that what this actually means in practice. In no event shall alternative compliance or payment to tree bank result in actual canopy on site falling below 55%. What does that mean? What does that look like in practice?
So there's like,
So go ahead, Ash. Go ahead, Ash. You can take that.
There's a tiered system of compliance, David. So for residential, first your goal is 65, right? If you can't hit 65 after the alternatives analysis, you can buy your way down to, I guess it is, what is it, 55 by paying into the tree bank, essentially. And then
more, right? It's more than 55. So you under alternative compliance, you can go to 55 with no buy-in, right? So that gives K has 10%. K can say, okay, here's your tournament. But then of that, let's say you go below that with alternative compliance, by using green infrastructure, you can offset up to half of that amount, and by having a green infrastructure plan. So let's say you couldn't hit 55. But you were with K, you were working it out, and you said, well, we can hit 40, and for the other 15, we are going to have green infrastructure development on the property. And then, like Mary Jane said, that would have to be spelled out so that you can equate, the apples, make an apples to apples comparison. We would have to spell out an administrative standard, the value of these projects, of the various green infrastructure projects.
So let me ask it a different way. So what is the problem that you're trying to address by adding that language about 55%?
It's not a problem we're looking to address. It's an incentive we're looking to create. So the incentive is to allow people who aren't hitting that point an out, and that out is expanding an area we need expansion of, which is green infrastructure. So it's saying, we know this situation, because it's in the alternative compliance section. So we know you might not reach this, but we have an option. You can put some solar panels in and bioswales. You can do these certain things, green roofs. You can do these things to offset the fact that you're under your canopy.
Yes, and so you would, again, it's a factor of DVH, understanding what the ecosystem services of the trees being removed are. And then we're trying to get to, if we can't have no net loss of trees, we need to try to have no net loss of ecosystem benefits. And this is getting to be more and more popular by the minute. And so we just need to standardize it, and that's going to be some work. But it does offer alternatives on a smaller lot, right?
Yeah, you have to keep that in mind. Some of these lots are very small. My lot has 100% coverage from one tree. So
but it also allows the city not to ignore, not to just give away our ecosystem benefits,
Right.
It gives them some ways they can negotiate, especially if we're doing this tree survey and tree analysis at the beginning, before the plans get all the way built out.
And David, another way to think about it is adding tools to the toolbox, in terms of, right now, you either have canopy or you pay into the tree bank. And this just gives a little more flexibility to the city. As Rich said, it gives some incentives to either have canopy or ecosystem services replaced.
I mean, think about it.
It allows you directly remedy on the site. If you're paying into the tree bank and across town you're planting trees, you may have a very, very hot site on your hands. And that's what we're trying to avoid,
And hence the backstop. That's why we didn't want, that's why we wanted to have a backstop, even for the green infrastructure, because, you don't want to have barren lots. That's just going to be something that exacerbates the heat island issue that's already exacerbated. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, no, as you guys explained it, it makes sense. As I read it, I'm not picking that up. But as you explain it, I hear what you're saying, and yeah, that makes sense.
And keep in mind too, this is, remember, this is not a document that's going to the commission. This is our recommendation for a working document to the city. So, you know, there's one thing I probably absolutely guarantee you, the final draft is not going to look like this, right? There's going to be some work to be done. So yeah, we can work on clarifying language even further. But since it's seemingly, you know, mostly makes sense at this point, can we move down?
Just as a time check, Rich, how close are we to making it through the document? We're at 10:47.
I'm sorry, I'm muting myself partially because there's a lot of noise outside. We are, hang on a
We
second.
can't hear the noise, so I wouldn't worry about the noise.
Okay, good. I'll leave it unchecked here. Let me just open my thing here. We are on 1.7, 917. Some of the stuff coming is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is pretty easy. We have
You don't need to go through it. I just wanted to give you a time
four
check.
sections.
Keep
We have
going.
4 more sections that are going to require, that are probably going to require some discussion out of all the remaining sections. So it's obviously going to take more than 12 minutes.
Are people able to stay if we go a little bit longer?
I think if we really put our nose to the grindstone, I think by 11:30, we can see where we're at. We may be able to be at the end at that point.
I can stick around. Do we have enough people that can stick around? Okay, I think we're good. Keep going, Rich.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll try to. I do not want to cut anyone's comments short, but so I may be moving quick, but please stop me if you want me to back up. Okay. So
I think we're doing good pace, and we need to have this conversation that we're having. So it's great.
Excellent. So David, this strikes me a little. I know it's small, but this is again the same kind of thing in C, where we're expanding the definition of protected trees a little bit. Ash, do you want to clean that up a little?
Again, I can consolidate that definition up top. I think that's
Thank you.
Suggestion.
And then not being used for tree removal, I think that's common sense, right? I mean, the city has plenty of money to remove trees that fall. Let's keep the tree bank for doing what it's supposed to do. We make 6 points below that, I think, kind of sum it up.
But hold on, sorry. What if there's a dead or dying tree on city property and they want to use the tree bank to remove that?
I know. I think they should use their general maintenance funds for that. There's plenty of it. You don't need to be tapping into our lowly tree bank to, I mean, the tree bank now has so little money in it. The tree bank's got to be for growth. I mean, there's money in the city to remove a tree. They removed, last storm we had, they removed 27, and none of the money came from the tree bank. Thank you, Ash. No, I wish we were at appeals, but we are not quite there yet. Okay, here we go. Here we are, right there. Okay, scroll down a little more. Okay, C, standard tree canopy. Basically, all we're asking for is when we have that value defined, that it is made available to the public via the portal. Again, that portal might change, but the language would change then too. Basically, just making it public. The tree planting easements. Yeah, this is the same language. We want to move to the top.
I'll do that offline to save.
Okay, we'll do that offline. Thank you, Ash. Just make a note for yourself. Here we're getting into maintenance requirements. So the word maintained was just not quite enough. So we expanded this a little bit. So take a quick read on that, see if you have any questions. Seems pretty straightforward. Just the language wasn't robust enough. Okay. Here in B, under the canopy loss fee, we changed this. This actually talks about the critical root zone. No other place in the document is 25%. Do we refer to, we protect 25%? It's always 20. So this just brings it into line with everything else, with every other reference to critical root zone. A is just defining language there. B is something worth discussing. I kind of touched on this in the original draft that was given to us. They allowed 125%, so basically 25% overage of the project size. So you're allowed to disturb land in excess of 25% of the size of your project. For small projects, this could be really tough. If you have a 100 square foot addition you're putting on, you're only going to be able to disturb 25 square feet that's not in that 100 square feet. So this is like, you know, theoretically, it's going to be impossible to do small projects. So what we're saying is, why not tie that to what's permissible as non-permeable ground and just slightly enlarge that envelope? And we looked at the numbers and we came up with 15% over the permitted impervious lot coverage, according to the charts that are already in the UDO for lot size. Is everyone good with that? I think that one makes sense. I think it's a good move. Otherwise, it would have been leading to a lot of problems. Okay, let's scroll down, Ash. This is just basic language that should have been in there, not to damage the soil and tree roots when you're dealing with mechanical means. Why is tree highlighted there?
Back up above it, you've got duplicative language in 3 that do not damage soil and tree roots, that do not damage.
Oh, yeah, thank you for that. And tree is highlighted. Oh, this is another DBH reference. Yeah, I think this is a good thing that we can discuss. We made it, that note is, we'll bring that. Do you want to make another note there, or you think that's fine, Ash, on that? You want to put like CDBH or something next to tree? This way, all our DBH stuff will be noted in the document so we can easily access it. Shall, I mean, that's basically, we were tasked in the TO to remove things like may and make a more robust document. So the arborist may require, well, it depends on the mood she's in. So no, shall. Okay, certified arborist, right? We don't want anyone calling themselves, anyone can call himself an arborist, I guess. So certified arborist for boundary trees. Otherwise, the boundary tree looks very good. Here we're adding to a landmark tree, we're adding priority, tree value, rubric, and census. So in C1, that's just a little clarification of a landmark tree. It's also allowing its historic significance to weigh in. And then we also want a public reporting of those landmark trees. That's done quarterly or put into the portal. And then priority trees. Here's the addition. So this might want to take some time and take a look at. This is just defining a priority tree. if you have any questions, let's take a minute or two. If you have any questions, please just bring them up.
It seems awfully arbitrary. As may be defined individually or by class from time to time. I
That's the
mean,
word.
you've got. I mean, we've got to give residents, some semblance of certainty, and developers as well. And this is anything but.
That is for the tree task force. That is giving language to the tree task force to say, here's what you can do, designating priority trees, classes of trees, historic trees, individual exceptional specimens, yada, yada. That work has to be done within 90 days of adoption of the tree ordinance. It probably has to go back to the city commission to be adopted as an ordinance. So I agree, that stuff has to be fully vetted. This is just truly general language to say, you can adopt classes of trees, types of trees, species of trees. This is typical priority tree language from other ordinances in the region. It's pretty basic stuff that other municipalities have that we just don't.
Ash, can you put that exactly what you said into the notes, because that keeps it plain language and that is understandable then to others. Can you please do that?
And also, Ash, I don't see the 90-day requirement in F. Is that at the end of this and referring to multiple sections? I know it's in G, I think, G and H, but I don't see the 90-day requirement in F.
Well, I'm sorry, this may be my error. I apologize. I didn't actually designate this for the task force, and it's not in there. So that's why the confusion. I apologize.
So in the sake of time, let's just put it in the notes here for discussion, because
Okay.
there's a lot there, and we can make those changes.
And just one other comment. So Ash, you said that this was standard language from other tree ordinances in the region. If that's the case, that we should mention that, because the only note I see here is that this provision was based on the Atlanta Citizens Blended Draft, which
We took the definition straight from there.
If there is adopted language within other municipalities, I think that would be a lot stronger than just leaning on the Citizens Blended Draft.
Okay.
It's just my recommendation.
No, yeah, no, it's a good one.
This is a
Good
big
recommendation.
change.
Thank you. I'm going to go back and do this offline to save time. Okay, y'all?
Okay, so you have those two items, right? So
Yep.
far? Okay, so the tree value rubric and census, if we could scroll down a little, please, Ash.
I think I did
And
a better
H.
job here of clarifying that the task force is what does this.
Yes, and here are the two, here are the instances where we have the 90-day. So both of these things are going to require further clarity, and we're basically saying after this is adopted, city, please, specify these things codify these things within 3 months. So the city task force is comprised of, basically, we're saying should be comprised of the city staff members that are appointed to do so, the tree board, and the city arborist. The tree board, is something that really actually should be in existence, because it's been called to be in existence since 2012, and this is going to be something that we're going to have to work closely with the city on, developing out. And the census will be a work in progress, obviously. But the 90 days is to come up with the plans for doing so.
And I would propose the same framework for priority trees.
Yes.
90 days, the task force does it. It probably has to go back to the commission. Thank you for catching that, y'all. That's a great addition.
Yes.
And I would say that we will still continue to find resources and examples of these things, right? To provide input to that task force, would you say? I mean, it's just that we're under a very strict timeline and we just.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Mary Jane, the ESB is the tree board. So we will be part of the process. We are the task force. We are 1/3 of the task force.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's proposed, right? But, the task force doesn't exist yet. The tree board is supposed to exist. So that's a whole other story for a different time. But if we can go to 916, this is pretty straightforward. You might want to read A. There's just some clarifying language there. Just, it's pretty typical contractual writing in case of ambiguities. Because this is a chart that's pulled from everything else, and there may not, if we miss something or in its brevity, it may not completely, gel with the TO. So we have that little statement in there. And then the rest of the actual chart, we've updated, hopefully didn't miss anything. We've updated that to reflect all the changes up to this point. Changes to 2.1, we wanted to add removal or disturbance of a protected tree. We wanted to remove the trees that were at moderate risk. And now in 2 and 3, we're talking about the tree removal permit application and what the minimums are for that application. So we're kind of defining a little bit of what we would expect to see in that type of application. And it's not meant to be all inclusive, but it's the minimum of what should be there. And in 3, we basically talking about permissible, legally permissible reasons. They also are not limited to these. This is just a guidance. Ash, we did make a mistake here. Or am I reading it wrong? Is 4 priorities with less than 53%? Is that supposed to be number 4, not 3? Subsection 4.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the next will be 5, and then 5 will be 6. Okay. So back to 4 then. 53, that's taken, that percentage is taken from earlier. We struck, why did we strike this? This, well, you guys read that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why we want to strike that. We would have a 25% canopy coverage, I think, if we allowed that to stand. This number, section 6, gives the arborist a nice amount of clearly defined responsibility.
I guess, so you struck that language, but what happens if we're talking about a lot where it's just not feasible?
Alternative compliance.
What's that?
You go to alternative compliance.
But isn't the tree bank?
Well, there's multiple things. There's administrative waivers, as we discussed.
Yep.
Alternative compliance with green infrastructure incentives, and there's also the variance process.
So shouldn't we, if we're going to strike that language, shouldn't we replace it with what you just said?
Yeah, if you keep going, you'll get to the alternative compliance section. I don't think we've reached it yet where it triggers that. Down here. In the event the canopy is below this, no, it's not here. I apologize.
Yeah, because that paragraph as it's written isn't accurate, or I should say it's misleading based on what's permitted elsewhere in the document.
I see what you're
I
saying,
guess you
David.
could argue it was misleading even before we made our edit.
Yeah, no, but you're right.
Reducing this number instead of eliminating it.
That might be the best thing. And what would be the number that would make sense based on what we put prior?
So this is for tree removal permits, which apply to, there's no development permit associated with this. So to be consistent with other, I think we allowed it to, I'm not sure, frankly. I'll have to think about that.
We had 50% in there, but didn't we have a backstop on that?
50%, and the next backstop I think was 25%.
25%. The number's got to be somewhere in there. Do you want to just make a suggestion, a note that this number should be lowered to between the 25 and 50% to be consistent with the rest of the TO? And then we can leave that as a discussion item for Kay and Hugh.
Sounds good.
Because 75% on a this is commercial, on the commercial lot. I mean, that's a good amount. I mean, you're looking at 5, 10, 12, 13. You're looking at 40% canopy coverage can be eliminated and paid into the bank. So you could have a lot with 13% coverage on it. That's at 75%.
This provision completely undermines the canopy protection goals.
Right. I would suggest closer to 25%. That's a lot. 25% is a lot to be able to pay into the tree bank, and all of a sudden you just got a 25% increase in what you're allowed to remove. I wouldn't go higher than that. That's my suggestion, that we put that in the note, or change it outright if everyone's in agreement with me to 75 to 25.
I would agree with that.
I'm in agreement with that.
So let's unstrike that, Ash, and just change that to 25 and keep your note. It's informative. And so the next part with the arborist, I think this is really great for someone like Kay that's in that role. I mean, it gives her some clearly defined things she can, sink her teeth into.
Frankly, this stuff is in the existing ordinance and was taken out. I'm not sure why. Mm-hmm. We added to it a little bit, allowing consideration of ecosystem services. But this is the kind of just standard legal boilerplate, like when you're reviewing an application, here's what you look at.
And number 7, same, important to have. Was 7 was also in the original TO?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I've updated this to try to create no new legal obligations here, except for monitoring. You'll see in subsection.
Except for the tree information portal, adding that public reporting. So it's basically, that's the only addition here. That's a market change over what was in the old ordinance.
Right. To get a permit, you comply with all of the other provisions we've been going through in detail, essentially. And I think these monitoring and compliance provisions are important. This is new and important for enforcement.
Yeah, let's leave that highlighted for a second and give people a chance to just look at that, see if there's any comments. Okay, is any questions on that?
Why?
So,
So just an idea, and we don't have to dwell on it. But for F, couldn't we just as easily require the city arborist to conduct the monitoring and inspection herself?
I found that I debated that myself. I didn't put that in because I thought it was a lot of work for the city arborist, honestly. I'd rather have reliable reports by a certified arborist who knows the site, who did the work, submit them, because we're asking a lot in terms of other work, but I'm open to other thoughts on that.
and I kind of like that a little too, even though we're getting another arborist, right?
What about if we did both? What about if either was an option for ensuring?
Well, what I would see happening, unless I'm seeing it wrong, so let's say, the removal company or the arborist company is submitting this stuff to 2K, then she has more of a desktop duty, right? She's not actually going into the field, but she's developing her own. I'm not sure this needs to be spelled out in the TO. She's developing her own system for spot checking certain vendors she might know have a bad track record, and she's going in there and checking those things out. But I think making it mostly administrative, where she's getting these things from the tree companies, probably just practically would, I think, make the most sense. But why don't we make some notes on that, and
I'm just thinking about the burden.
I think,
about the
David,
burden on the homeowner. That which may not be much of one, but
yeah, but David, I think the arborist needs to get out a little bit more and not be sending the inspectors for this kind of stuff.
well, that's what David's saying. He's like, why can't the arborist? Why can't Kay also go and
I think, we're 4 square miles. We're 4 square miles. And especially if we're getting a second arborist, we really need to go out and take a look at some of these properties. And oh, by the way, take a look at some of the ones that have previously filed permits on the same street, and take a glance at some of the trees that should be looked at vis-a-vis a new home, and all of a sudden you discover the tree's dead. I mean, it might be a good idea to get out and about a little bit more. Especially
true, but she would have to go for each one of these. It's once a year. She'd have to go 3 times. If we mandate that the city arborist does it, she would have to go 3 times for every one of these. That's a full-time job. She wouldn't be able to do anything else.
You're right. I mean, you're right.
And she does have to do at least one of them, right? So
yeah,
the original,
like
the first.
Getting out to the site. She is getting out to the site.
The first time, yeah. But the maintenance, we're allowing, over that 3-year period to basically, and we're not saying she can, we're not limiting it, but we're just saying that we're broadening it and not putting it all in her wheelhouse.
Okay.
This is interesting. Here is where we start to define the pre-application, the tree conservation plan and the conference. This first language, Ash, is this, what is this is language that was given to us by Hugh?
Yeah, I'm just praising it. That's all. It's great. I think this is critical and helpful.
And then we just go on to kind of codify a written documentation that would go along with that conference.
Right.
And where are we going with this, Ash, now that I look at it again for like the 10th time? But one, is it necessary to state this here, the last few words of that sentence there? Yeah.
No, it's not necessary.
Yeah, the necessity because of the reasonable. That sounds like it's getting in the weeds. That look good to everybody? Okay. Let's scroll down. Okay, number 6. This is just saying, hey, here are the limits to why we would not grant the tree conservation plan. And here are the criteria if you want to look those over.
And again, this is comply with the tree ordinance.
This is from our original, right?
Yeah,
Or is
this
this
is the same
from?
as the language above, essentially,
Okay.
that we reviewed.
So this is the similar language that we have for tree permits applying to the tree conservation plan, which is our other.
And then the monitoring reports are down here in subsection 7.
So for subsection 7, what is different there, as I pointed out before, is we're allowing for, is this where we're allowing for the reports demonstrating compliance annually for at least 2 years?
Right. Similar to what we just discussed with the tree removal permit.
There's also public reporting there. Questions on that? Excuse me. Feel free to scroll down. I need a drink of water. Excuse me.
Okay, so subsection C here was an idea to put a placard up like they do for stream buffer variances when a tree permit is pending. Post a placard. Hopefully, ideally, folks could look up the permit online and see what's proposed. And then subsection D is just clarifying, if you get a stream buffer variance or a zoning variance, you don't have a free ride through the tree ordinance. You still have to comply with the tree ordinance.
Common sense.
Yeah. Just trying to avoid some lawyer making an argument later.
Believe it or not, we made no real changes in service parking lots. They covered that pretty well. We changed the metric only to dovetail with interdev.
I would just, along the way, make sure that the parking lot islands are sufficient volume. I know that's something that Atlanta has attempted to spell out to make a healthy tree canopy and not one that dies in 10 years. So, and
So
there's
that
this-
image,
yeah.
that image there, is that image a duplicate image from the administrative standards? Is that also in administrative standards? Do you guys remember?
Probably, well, it could be.
I do not believe it is. It's
Okay.
consistent with the other images that are found throughout the UDO, and I think we're working on having a few more. So.
Okay. Setbacks, we made no changes there. Utility company requirements, we made no changes there. Is that a misspelling? I don't know what that is. Oh, moderate. Yes, thank you. We just, again, to keep consistent, we pulled risk trees to just high risk. Violations and penalties. So in this first part here, we allowed for stop work order, which, I mean, that to me, makes perfect sense. You have to allow for that. You see a tree going down, it shouldn't be going down. We need to have the ability to have a stop work order. We have stop work orders for mud flowing into the street from a driveway, so we need to have the ability to do stop work order. Okay, and then B. So this is a punitive if trees are unlawfully removed or disturbed. We're not going to grant the certificate of occupancy, which is stated prior in the TO for that area.
That is excessive. I mean, why would you, why wouldn't you just withhold the certificate of occupancy until the situation's remedied? But to just outright reject granting it for a period of 5 years seems arbitrary and capricious.
So this provision is when a tree was unlawfully removed. This is punitive.
Right. No,
for
I hear
sure.
you. I hear you.
This creates a very strong incentive to not screw it up. And this is, I think, from the Atlanta draft. We didn't make this up.
The citizens draft or what the actual city is?
The blended draft, yeah, the citizens blended.
Yeah, which is going to be more liberal or more progressive in there.
We do need to look at that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, David. Keep in mind, it's only for the area that was in the critical root zone of the tree that was removed. It's not for the whole project, right? So it's a very specific type of removal. It's not just because you removed the tree on your property you weren't supposed to and built a wing off the back of your house. You know, this is about removing a tree and then building something right there when you weren't supposed to do that. And it would be really hard to kind of think about it in practice. It'd be kind of hard to do that by mistake. You know, I mean, you have a site plan, you have a pre-conference, you're building something, there's a tree there. You know, you have to be told that if you remove this, you got to do X, Y, and Z, you have to have a permit. I mean, it would have to me, be almost, I see what you're saying, but it would have to be an egregious denial of the TO in order to fall into this hole. It's not like, oh my gosh, I removed a tree by mistake and now they're not giving me a C of O. No, you removed the tree where you actually built the wing on your house when we told you not to, or when we told you there needed to be a permit filed or alternative compliance or canopy coverage requirements met. But that's just the framework. I do see what you're saying. It does sound extremely punitive. I'm open to listening to more ideas on that.
I personally would like to see us get creative with the remediation that's required in the event this happens. So if a developer or homeowner does this, what must they do to remedy the situation? I think that's where we ought to take the discussion rather than just looking at purely punitive, 5-year restriction on issuance of the CO.
What if we required planting of a tree that becomes a protected tree in that same area? That would essentially
that doesn't make up for the system, the benefits lost.
No.
Right. But what I mean is it would block any kind of development in that area, which is one of the aspects of it, and then also do make up for the losses with, say, stormwater remedies, things like that. So it essentially adds cost, and it also prevents them from saying, oh, well, I cut down that tree. Well, now that it's down, I can build there.
I'd like to see that the C of O is withheld until the canopy requirements are met. So there you remediate, right? And the fine paid, similar to the fines that we were assessing based on, and for illegal tree removal based on DBH, which is steep. Those fines are $240 an inch. So if you have a 20-inch tree, you're paying $5,000, $4,800.
Yeah, Atlanta moved that.
But but also this is preventative. This is to stop, this is to make people think and not do.
But it is excessive. It is like,
I love what Rich just proposed. I would think, Annie, to your point, I mean, we do want to provide a disincentive, right? And I feel like what Rich just said is a pretty strong disincentive.
I think I agree with that too. And the other thing is that having that kind of language in there is not as gets people to really kick back to say this is ridiculous. The
Agreed.
way 5 years does.
Yeah, I agreed.
Well, and you know, a lot of times this is the contractor, and that financial penalty will, if it's like the 240 that Atlanta has and that we've put in, it is a deterrent, but you're so much, I believe, less likely to have a homeowner do that type of thing. So I just don't see too many homeowners doing that and incurring the 5,000 or higher. 20 is not that big a tree. But Atlanta took the cap off of their fees, so it's by DBH.
I missed that Kay had joined us and had put a comment in, just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. She said there's already a soil volume requirement. It is in the administrative standards.
I can take that comment out as a result. That's helpful.
Thanks for joining us, Kay.
So Rich
Hi,
said,
everybody. Sorry I came in late.
No worries. You don't even need to be here because we were going to send most of this to you and talk to you on the 30th, but this makes it easier because
Yeah, but thanks for coming.
No worries.
Okay, so in an event the tree is unlawfully removed or disturbed, financial penalty should be assessed an amount of no less than. Do you want to write that as a comment, or do you want to write that as, because we have no other penalties outlined here. We were saving them all for the administrative standards, but
Can we say that it will be based on DBH?
yes, can we just say based on DBH, and in the comments say the target penalty is 240 per inch.
yep.
And then we do need to add something else here. We want to withhold the CO until the property comes up to canopy requirements, to compliance with the canopy requirements. Great.
Capture it.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm going to have to spin off. We have still enough folks, it looks like, to keep our quorum.
Well, Mary Jane, before you go, could we do what we did with Allison? You know, all we have left is the appeals process is straightforward. Do you
Okay.
do you approve sending this to Hugh and Kay as is after we finish the last little
Yes,
thing?
I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, so we can record that.
I do too. I have got to leave at 11:30.
Okay, Annie, thank you so much. We'll record
Thank you
that as a
guys so
yay.
much for
Thank
all of
you.
this work.
This has
It's
been
incredible.
marvelous. And David, thank you for your input. I can't thank you enough.
And we have less than 10 minutes, guys, so I appreciate the hangers on. So you guys have a great weekend,
You
Mary
too.
Jane and Annie.
Take
And thanks
care.
for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Mhm. My
Bye.
pleasure. So our strike through, Ash, walk us through the strike through on D.
Okay, that was we just moved some text from
Okay.
D to B regarding C of O is my,
There we go.
or
That's pretty
excuse me,
straightforward.
to A. We moved it up to A.
I think that makes sense. And E.
Although
Walk us
actually,
through
I want to keep this back in. It's a little bit more restrictive.
in the event.
No.
Now that's the original language from the UDO. No, that's no. We need to delete that.
That completely. Excuse me.
Yeah, just outright delete that. I don't.
Yeah, that was.
There you go.
Okay. My apologies.
And walk us through E real quick, if you could, Ash.
These are general ideas. You can recover penalties from property owners, developers, tree contractors, jointly and severally, which means each of them can be responsible for all of it. just as to make the city's enforcement easier. And the task force is tasked with a penalty schedule that's based on the lifespan of the tree and the ecosystem services and quality of the tree.
And that we'll build that out in the administrative standards or the fee sheet that is referred to. That needs approval by the commissioners.
It probably does.
Yeah.
If it's going to be essentially code, it'll probably have to go back to the commission.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And appeals. So A is unchanged. That's the UDO administrator appeal. So here's where the levels come in. So you have the city arborist. Okay, that's number one. And the no, so this is saying, so the city arborist, so appealing to alternative compliance with the city arborist is defined in the TO, in the alternative compliance section. This is basically saying, here's your appeal. If you don't like what the arborist has to say, you go in writing to the UDO administrator. In this case, that's John, right? And then, it has to be within 30 days, yada, yada, that's unchanged. But then we come in to talk about the other levels of appeal, because we do limit what the UDO administrator can do, as it should be. We go to the tree board next, which is something that they would come to us. Now, this is a kind of a big deal, because the tree board, you guys have to look at the community forest management plan from 2012 to kind of see how they define the tree board. The tree board is defined as a part of a wholly owned encapsulated part of the ESB. But it's going to require some work. I'm just kind of putting this forth there because it's a regulatory capacity. Right now we have no regulatory duties whatsoever. So it completely changes the face of the ESB a little bit. So I just want to let everyone be aware that this could be a little bit of a challenge. But yes, so what it says here though is the city tree board, the division of the ESB, would become a regulatory board and would hear grievances. And then finally, as in all things in the UDO, the final stop is the ZBA. And so we do not limit that here. We just say that for cases pertaining to appeals to the ZBA, that the arborist should be present. She should be present so that she could be questioned by the ZBA.
And the intent is not to hijack ESB meetings with tree stuff. A lot of folks said it should be a subset of the ESB if it goes this direction.
And most likely it would have to be, right? And you would have to work closely with the city to kind of to work that out, because we would need proper meeting spaces. Everything would need to be recorded. It's going to be very similar to the planning commission. You'd have to have all your T's crossed. I mean, advisory is important and we need to cross our T's here, but regulatory is even more so, right? Because that's where you can get into a lot of trouble. And that's all we got. Any general comments or concerns?
Just that you guys have done a great job and have obviously put in a tremendous amount of time and effort. So I, for one, appreciate that.
Thank you.
And thanks for your close reading as well. It's really appreciated.
Yes, it is. We spotted a couple of big ones there that I think we would have glossed over without your input.
I'll echo what David Malkin said. This is a huge effort by a lot of people, and we really, really appreciate it. If there are no other concerns, I think with the remaining folks that are here, we can vote. And then please stay on just like another minute or two, because there are a couple things I want to go over for the next meeting. So Rich, do you want to make the motion?
Yes, I move that we approve this revision as is to send to the city, Hugh and Kay, namely Hugh and Kay.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed or abstentions? All right. And with the yeses that we had from the 3 who had to drop off early, that's passed. We'll send that on to Kay and Hugh. Kay, since you're here, know that that's coming. I'll actually, since you have it, can you
I
make
was
sure
just
it
going to
gets?
say, yeah, Ash, can you email
then I can
Michael? And then
send that.
Michael, can you put it in our drive? So that will be
Yes,
our,
I will
yeah,
also put it in our drive. Yep.
great.
And then here are the other things. May 14th is our next scheduled meeting, I think, from 9 to 11. I want to make sure that we're going to make quorum on that day because we'll have a lot of people presenting. And so we need to give them as much advance notice as possible. Are you guys able to make May 14th?
What, at 9 o'clock?
Yeah, 9 to 11. It's the regularly scheduled time. I just want to make sure we have enough people who can make it.
Yeah. We have states, and my daughter has states, but I don't think that's till the afternoon. Well, hopefully she has
Yeah,
states. We'll
okay.
see.
Yeah, I
I
may
can't
only
do
be able to
it.
make half of it, but so.
Okay, okay, great. And then I texted and heard back from Mesa and Allen. On Thursday, the best time for them would be 10 to 11. Does that work for other folks who want to be on the waste observation? Okay. So David Nifong, if you can schedule that for 10 to 11 on Thursday, that'd be perfect. And then the last thing is, I think this is going to take us some time, especially since this took us some time and we're pretty much on the same page next meeting. So my suggestion is that we plan on what we ended up with today, which is we plan on the meeting going from 10 to 11:30 on the 30th. Does that sound reasonable to folks?
Yes, that's fine with me. I just a caveat, I'll be on a client site, but I don't want to miss it. So I will try to be as engaged as I can be at the time.
I appreciate that. And then I asked for public comment in the chat and got a bunch, but I don't want to leave out people who may want to say something. So if there's something that really needs to be said, we will have public comment again on the 30th. So if you can keep it in the chat, great. But if you really feel like you want to say something for public comment, now is the time to unmute yourself and let us know.
As we give people an extra moment, Michael, I just want to say, as I reviewed the comments, thank you, everybody. Everyone really was very supportive of the work that we did. I want to like to thank everyone for coming and for your gracious words. The one thing I did want to address, because David Malkin said it earlier, and I think Sherry put it there, we are not most likely, and I can probably say with 99% accuracy, we are not going to be looking at the administrative standards on next Friday. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. It is going to be more of drilling down to the tree ordinance with Kay and with Hugh. So we don't, I don't anticipate.
A lot of what we do with the administrative standards is going to be dependent on what we decide.
Right, exactly. So I don't anticipate having something ready for you guys. And a matter of fact, it's pretty detailed. We're going to have to wait for the team to get together and make recommendations, which we have not begun on that. So it is going to be at least a couple of weeks before we have something together for that, after the meeting. Okay.
Great. Since nobody's chimed in other than in the chat, I'll make sure that the chat makes it into the minutes. Thank you all. And thank you so much, everybody, for staying on all this extra time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks again, Ash.
Thanks all.